Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
Coming up on Arirang News. In just a couple of hours, the main event of President Yoon-Biden state visit to the U.S. The Yoon-Biden summit will be held at the White House with security and economy likely to top the agenda. And at the summit, the two leaders are expected to adopt what's called the Washington Declaration for extended deterrence against North Korea's threats. President Yoon's sales diplomacy wins another investment of $1.9 billion to Korea, this time from tech companies. This as he insists the Seoul-Washington alliance must leap into a new phase, moving forward as tech partners. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. in South Korea. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. The only place to begin tonight, Washington, D.C. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol will be holding bilateral talks with U.S. President Joe Biden in the coming hours. So let's connect to our Yoon Jung-min live in D.C., right in front of the White House. So Jung-min, how's it going there?
Hello there, Jiyoung. In about 2 hours, President Biden will be hosting President Yoon at the White House, as you see just behind me. No doubt it's a very important day.
Absolutely. I'll hand it over to you and see you later in our newscast.
All right. Thank you, Jiyoung. It's a little past 8 in the morning, April 26th. Live from Washington, D.C., I'm Yoon Jung-min. Today, Presidents Yoon and Biden will sit down for talks on North Korea, where we expect a declaration that contains stronger measures to deal with the regime's provocations, as well as on key economic and technology cooperation. But first, allow me to introduce our panel this morning. I'm joined by Mr. Mark Tokola, Vice President of the Korea-Economic Institute of America, and Woo Soo-young, our presidential office correspondent traveling with the president. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. Morning. So, Mark, first, yesterday, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol contributed to securing billions of dollars of investment in key economic sectors, including hydrogen and chips. Also, bilateral cooperations in EVs, batteries, and AI took center stage during the ROK-U.S. Business Roundtable, to which you were invited yesterday. So what do you make of these events in terms of the two nations' economic cooperation?
I've got to say, first, it was fun to be at that business roundtable. It was a great event. It was unusual to be in the same room with representatives from different kinds of sectors, entertainment and batteries and semiconductors and medical. And they were talking among themselves about how it is to work with Korean companies in Korea. It was a very exciting event. I think the headline of the economic story from this summit is the strength of the U.S. ROK economic relationship right now. You know, as a percentage of exports to the world, South Korean exports are 17.7% of the United States now, highest in 20 years. So you add together the investment and the trade and the investment environment, and we're at an all-time high, I think, in the U.S. or South Korea economic relationship. It's wonderful.
Right. And Soo-young, today's summit is undoubtedly an important event for both sides. What will the two leaders be looking to get out of it personally?
Well, I think as much as possible for both sides, because they want to build that political capital among their respective publics, especially with President Biden yesterday having said that he's going to run again for presidency in 2024. We saw from his Northern Ireland and Ireland trip that he really wants to use these diplomatic opportunities, I suppose, to boost that kind of support. And, well, for President Yoon, his approval rating, it's been on the decline for the past few weeks, primarily because of some foreign policy-related issues. So if all goes well and he gets some nice diplomatic and economic gifts from Mr. Biden this trip, then that would hopefully lift his approval ratings back at home.
Nice analysis there. All right, we will be back with you in a bit, but first, here are the day's headlines. So in just a couple of hours from now, the welcoming ceremony for President Yoon will kick off at the White House. Our presidential office correspondent Kim Do-yeon is there to get us an even closer look at the Saints. So Do-yeon, what's it like there and what can we expect today?
Well, good morning, Jungmin. I'm out here at Lafayette Square, and as you can see, the White House is right behind me. And as you've been saying, the welcoming ceremony will kick off in just a few hours, signaling that President Yoon's state visit's main event has kicked off. Now, I've been out here since early in the morning, and I can tell you the security is very tight. As you can see, it has been cordoned off here, and normally tourists will be able to go beyond this point even closer to the White House, but because of the occasion, it has been cordoned off here today. Now, at the welcoming ceremony, which will last about 30 minutes, you'll see blank artillery shots fired by soldiers lined up and the leaders addressing people at the South Lawn. Some of the Korean American communities here have been invited to come and join in welcoming President Yoon. Now, as for the plans for the rest of the day, there will be two different meetings for the leaders, one with just their top diplomats and national security advisors, and another with a much expanded group. After that, there will be a joint declaration by the two leaders, followed by a press conference. And last but definitely not least, there will be a state dinner hosted by President Biden and the First Lady. About 35 people are on President Yoon's guest list, and as White House has announced before, a Korean American chef, Edward Lee, is in charge of the food served at the state dinner. Now, that's all I got for you. Now, back to you, Jungmin.
All right, thank you, Do-yeon. A day ahead of the summit between the presidents of South Korea and the U.S., the allies announced they will be adopting what's called the Washington Declaration, aimed at strengthening extended deterrence against North Korea's threats. Seoul's presidential office said Tuesday, Washington local time, that this includes the creation of a new mechanism called the Nuclear Consultative Group, or NCG, that will focus on nuclear and strategic planning. Kurt Campbell, the coordinator for Indo-Pacific Affairs in the U.S. National Security Council, also said Washington intends to take more visible steps and that this includes a U.S. nuclear ballistic submarines visit to South Korea, which has not happened since the early 1980s. He explained the Washington Declaration would also involve factors like training, information sharing, and specific movements of strategic assets, and added specific details will be outlined after the summit. President Yoon's sales diplomacy reaped more returns on Tuesday, with American tech companies pledging investments into Korea. Our senior top office correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
A total of $5.9 billion is how much President Yoon Suk-yeol has reaped in investment pledges so far during his official state visit to Washington, D.C. On the second day of his trip, the self-professed #1 salesman of Korea on Tuesday attended an investment declaration event where 6 high-tech American firms committed a total of $1.9 billion into South Korea, where they will build production facilities. President Yoon thanked the CEOs of each company, saying chipmakers onsemi and Green Tweet's pledges will contribute to economic security by strengthening the semiconductor industry supply chain. He added that Air Products and Plug Power's investment in clean hydrogen, as well as Pure Cycle Technology and EMP Belstar, will play a major role in the transition to eco-friendly energy and industrial structures. Material science company Corning Incorporated also made a pledge of $1.5 billion. To attract further investments, the South Korean leader vowed to make efforts to create the world's best investment environment by improving regulations to meet global standards and providing clear incentives to firms that contribute to the stabilization of high-tech industries and supply chains. This comes as President Yoon pushes to broaden the scope of Seoul and Washington's 70-year-old military alliance.
다양한 이유에 의한 경기 둔화 등 투자 환경이 쉽지 않고 또 기술 경쟁, 에너지, 기후 위기에 따라 여러 가지 불확실성이 날로 증가하고 있습니다. 저는 이 복합 위기를 우리가 함께 극복하기 위해서는 한미 동맹이 새로운 단계의 동맹으로 도약해야 된다고 생각합니다. 군사 안보 동맹으로 시작한 양국 관계를 공급망, 첨단 과학기술 동맹으로 발전시켜 양국이 함께 성장하고 행동하는 동맹으로 만들어야 합니다.
Yoon on Tuesday also held a business roundtable event, which included 30 leaders from some of South Korea and America's largest tech firms. Among those attending from South Korea were the heads of Samsung, LG, Hyundai, Lotte, and SK Hynix. From the US side were Qualcomm, Microsoft, and Google, along with General Motors, Tesla, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Moderna. Yoon on Monday met the CEO of Netflix, who committed $2.5 billion of investment into Korean content over a 4-year period.
President Yoon is traveling with his largest ever business delegation of some 122 corporate leaders. With his focus on emerging tech sectors, Yoon is expected to attend more industry-related events this week, including a video content forum here in Washington, D.C., and an industrial cluster roundtable in Boston. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News, Washington, D.C.
And attending a ROK-U.S. business roundtable, President Yoon highlighted the Seoul-Washington partnership on advanced technology. Choi Min-jung has more.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol during Tuesday's business roundtable in Washington expressed hopes of creating economic synergies that will benefit both South Korea and the U.S. He said this would be possible by combining core technologies from the two countries.
이번 미국 방문을 계기로 양국이 명실상부한 첨단 기술 동맹임을 재확인하고 기업인들께서도 새롭고 혁신적인 비즈니스 기회를 창출할 수 있기를 기대합니다.
Yoon noted that South Korea and the U.S. entered into an economic alliance in 2012 after signing a bilateral FTA. And over the span of 11 years, the bilateral trade volume has grown by 90%. He underlined that the U.S. is now South Korea's second largest trading partner, while South Korea is the state's sixth largest. This highlights how the Seoul-Washington alliance has gone beyond just a security alliance and has developed into one that mutually benefits both economies. Following the business roundtable, Seoul's senior presidential secretary for economic affairs said South Korea and the U.S. have now established an inseparable relationship.
The scale of investment is also important, but as the President said, the two countries require each other in almost all areas of high-tech supply chains and industry.
He added that the business forum was very meaningful in celebration of the 70 years of the Seoul-Washington alliance, as it was filled with passion for cooperation. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
The South Korean president also turned the spotlight to cooperation on space on Tuesday with a visit to NASA's first space flight center. He was accompanied by U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. Lee Dae-yeon covers the visit.
Space ties between South Korea and the U.S. reach a milestone. President Yoon Suk-yeol on Tuesday visited NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland with U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. During his visit, President Yoon highlighted the importance of the joint statement of intent for cooperation on space exploration and science, which was signed by South Korea's Minister of Science and ICT Lee Jong-ho and NASA Deputy Administrator Pam Melroy on the same day.
오늘 체결하는 대한민국 과학기술정보통신부와 미국 나사 간의 공동성명서는 그간 양국의 우주 협력이 명실상부한 우주 동맹으로 한 단계 도약하는 계기가 될 것입니다.
He also said that he hoped developments in the field of space between the two countries would contribute to the world while setting up fair and rational principles in terms of utilizing outer space. Yoon also mentioned NASA's accomplishments, adding that studying space will result in solutions to current global issues such as climate change. He said that South Korea is working on establishing a National Aeronautics Administration or a Korean version of NASA in order to lead the country's space economy. He also expected more space cooperation between Korea's National Aeronautics Administration and NASA.
카사와 나사 간 공동 연구 개발 프로그램을 발굴해서 착수하고 협력 파트너로서 인력 교류, 정보, 지식 교류를 활발히 할 수 있도록 커뮤니케이션 플랫폼을 구축할 수 있기 바랍니다. 카사 설립에도 나사의 적극적인 조언과 직접적인 인력 교류가 있기를 희망합니다.
Meanwhile, in joint remarks, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris said the two countries renewed their commitment to strengthening cooperation in the next frontier of expanding the bilateral space alliance. She welcomed South Korea for joining in current space exploration mission and further cooperation in the Artemis program to return astronauts to the moon. She also described the 70-year alliance between the two countries as the linchpin of security in the Indo-Pacific. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
And ahead of the summit, Presidents Yoon and Biden and the First Ladies had time to build personal ties and friendship, exchanging special gifts. Lee Soo-jin has a glimpse.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and U.S. President Joe Biden met on Tuesday local time ahead of their state dinner and summit talks. President Yoon and First Lady Kim Gun-hee first visited the Bidens at the White House, where they were presented with gifts.
President Biden gave President Yoon vintage baseball memorabilia, as he is a known baseball fan who also recently threw the ceremonial first pitch at a Korean Baseball League game.
President Biden also gifted him with a handmade mahogany table, while First Lady Jill Biden gave Korea's First Lady a sapphire pendant necklace created by a Korean-American designer. They also visited the Korean War Veterans Memorial, where they each laid wreaths and bowed their heads in silence. The two were accompanied by the First Ladies as they honored those who had lost their lives during the Korean War. On Wednesday local time, Yoon and Kim will sit down to a state dinner hosted by Biden at the White House. The state dinner pays tribute to the cultures of both countries through place settings, decorations, and even the menu.
As we welcome President Yoon and Mrs. Kim, honoring the 70 years of our alliance with symbols and moments of beauty that reflect both our countries.
The table decor will have a color scheme reflecting the South Korean national flag, while the 6-foot-tall centerpieces of cherry trees are reminiscent of both the streets of Jeju and Washington's tidal basin in springtime. The Bidens also invited Korean-American guest chef and TV personality Edward Lee to prepare the dinner alongside the White House chefs, a measure of culinary diplomacy by the U.S. first couple. The first course will include Maryland crab cake served with a dish dressed in gochujang, a spicy sweet Korean fermented paste to honor the food of both countries. The main course of galbi, or beef short ribs, featuring butter bean grits, carrots, and pine nuts, is also a marriage of food from South Korea and the U.S. And it will be banana split for dessert, a dish that Jill Biden affectionately said was her husband's favorite during a preview of the state dinner. That will be topped with a caramel sauce infused with Korean fermented bean paste, doenjang. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
President Yoon Suk-yeol will be welcomed into the White House today by a special children's choir with the traditional Korean song Arirang. Our culture correspondent Song Yoo-jin has their story.
Day 3 of President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit to the U.S. will begin with an arrival ceremony at the White House. There, he'll be greeted by a special group of cultural envoys, the New Jersey Children's Choir. The choir is made up of students from the Korean School of New Jersey, a weekend school that offers Korean culture and language classes for Korean Americans. Ahead of their White House performance, Arirang News had the chance to speak with Principal Hwang Hyun-ju, the choir's director.
When we first created this choir in 2014, we did it to teach our students Korean culture so that they could promote Korean culture to their audience in the future.
The children are no strangers to singing on big stages like at the U.S. Capitol and the United Nations. After seeing their videos on YouTube, the White House offered them the chance to perform. And their performance on Wednesday will be one for the books, as it offers these performers a rare opportunity to take to the stage at the White House. Their set list, the Korean folk song Arirang, and Tomorrow from the Broadway musical Annie.
Arirang represents the unity of Koreans, as it's a song that every Korean knows, and Tomorrow is one of the songs we've sung in the past. It symbolizes hope for the future, so we picked the song hoping that our two countries can become even better friends tomorrow.
Principal Hwang hopes Wednesday's performance will serve as a cultural bridge for all.
It's really meaningful that these children are performing in front of the presidents of their parents' home country and their own country's president. I want the children to feel proud of their heritage and show those in Korea how well they're doing overseas.
Upon hearing the news, the choir has plugged in extra rehearsals on top of their regular Saturday practice sessions. All that's left now is for their harmonious voices to ring out across the White House while wearing the Korean traditional hanbok. 송유진, Arirang News.
For those who are just tuning in, you are watching Arirang's special coverage of the South Korean president's state visit to the U.S., coming to you live from Washington. And for further discussion on today's Yoon-Biden summit, let's turn back to Mr. Mark Tokola, Vice President of the Korea Economic Institute of America, and our Oh Soo-young, our presidential office correspondent. So, Soo-young, let's talk about what to expect on North Korea front, because Seoul's top office says a Washington declaration will be adopted, and today containing stronger extended deterrence measures. So what's worth noticing would be the allies, nuclear consultative groups. What can you tell us more?
Well, first of all, as you said, this Washington declaration is going to basically show how South Korea and the United States, they're going to be engaging in more information sharing, nuclear sharing, also planning and execution upon an attack by North Korea, obviously. And this kind of document has come about, it will come about rather, because South Korea has, for quite some months now, been very vocal about how it wants stronger reassurances from the United States in terms of strengthening extended deterrence, which of course is America's policy of coming to its allies' defense under nuclear and even conventional attack. And given North Korea's growing nuclear and missile weapons capabilities that we've seen in recent months, very disturbing if you look at their growing asymmetrical capabilities that could, which could, well, as many fear, pretty much overwhelm the sort of ground-based defenses we have in South Korea. Their hypersonic weapons, for instance, that could potentially escape detection. And in recent weeks, we've seen the testing of their solid fuel intercontinental ballistic missiles. So all of these threats have put South Korean officials on edge, I suppose. And, well, around 80% of South Koreans apparently now believe that South Korea should have its own nuclear weapon. And given all these concerns, Mr. Yoon and Mr. Biden, they obviously want to put their public's mind at rest, and they've come up with this Washington declaration that apparently has been in discussion for quite a couple of months now, according to Mr. Kurt Campbell, coordinator for Indo-Pacific Affairs at the National Security Council. And he said that this does not mean, though, the permanent forwarding of U.S. strategic assets, particularly not a nuclear weapon. He says there will be strategic assets deployed to the Korean Peninsula, but this will be regular visits to demonstrate the strength of the alliance and their readiness against North Korea's threats.
Right. And Mark, on the economic front, some watchers in Korea say the U.S. CHIPS Act demand too sensitive data for chip makers for subsidies. And Korean car makers, including Hyundai and Kia, some big names there, have been left off the list for the tax benefits under the IRA, the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, as Washington tries to keep the China out of supply chain. So what do you make of that?
Well, we have now 8 months of experience with these two acts. They were passed in August of last year. So I think it's become clear over time, as we've looked at their effects, that Korea is going to do very well from both the CHIPS Act and the IRA Act. I mean, one Taiwanese market research firm, Trend Forward, said that Samsung is going to benefit hugely from the CHIPS Act. And on the IRA, it's not just the question of the cars being imported today, it's the future. So if the effect is to replace Chinese batteries in American cars with Korean batteries, that's a very good thing. And analysts estimate that the Korean battery companies, SK and LG, who operate in the States, are going to derive maybe $14.5 billion in tax benefits from the IRA. So I think we're seeing that Korea is going to do very well from both acts.
So it's investment for future. And Mark, speaking to the Korean press corps yesterday, U.S. National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communication, John Kirby, mentioned ROK-U.S. joint efforts to protect their key technology when asked about a recent report that said Washington has asked Seoul not to fill in the gaps, the shortage to market gap if China bans sales of Micron's chips, memory chips. Do we expect from the two leaders today regarding this?
I'm not sure we'll hear about Micron from them at the press conference or in their comments to press, but I think the issue is worth following. I think South Korea has very good reason to ask the United States about what's meant by this. As I understand it, Micron does not produce cutting-edge chips. They produce rather commodity chips. And the issue is not export control. The issue is China banning the imports of these Micron chips. So it's not an export control question. It's a question of how the U.S. and South Korea respond to economic coercion together. If that's what Micron's about, then this is a new policy instrument, and both sides should discuss how they would use that.
All right. And So-young, Presidents Yoon and Biden have been emphasizing the alliance becoming a global, comprehensive strategic alliance. What does that mean, and what outcomes are we expecting?
Okay, well, we're expecting a very comprehensive outcome that's going to be presented in various formats of documents or declarations, I believe. And, well, they're going to talk about a whole spectrum of ways that South Korea and the United States can cooperate, from traditional security and trade issues to all sorts of things like AI, bio, space, tech even. And, well, if we compare the summit to the previous, former President Lee Myung-bak's state visit, for instance, his summit with then incumbent President Obama back then, they were focusing on building the economic relationship with their free trade agreements. And if this time around, it's going to stretch beyond that. So beyond traditional security issues, then economic issues. Now it's going to be what President Yoon has been calling a global comprehensive strategic alliance. Quite wordy for me to remember. But this is basically cooperating in every critical area possible, from securing supply chains and semiconductors, biotech, and other strategic areas that's going to be essential for the two countries to build up their capabilities and for the future of their economic security. Now, that's the key word for both countries this year around. And they're going to also be talking about cyber security as well, as both countries join together to really tackle the various new emerging threats on the cyber front in the virtual space. So this could include information warfare and also cyber crimes that we see by North Korea, of course. So, well, this is no longer just going to be about the military alliance, as I said again, and also the just simple trade volume related kind of issues, but we're going to see, a very, very comprehensive kind of joint statement coming out today.
Speaking of the global comprehensive strategic alliance, will there be any statements on or measures on Ukraine, the global issues?
Right, so that's quite interesting, because in regards to providing more aid to Ukraine, there seems to be different kind of expectations by the two sides in terms of how far the conversation will go. Because Seoul's top office has been saying that it's not being prepared as an official agenda. They've been maintaining that position for a number of days, weeks rather, but the United States, the White House even said yesterday that it will certainly be discussed, although they do respect individual countries' sovereign decisions on how much aid that they're providing to Ukraine, or what kind of what form of aid they are offering to Ukraine. So it does seem that Seoul is expecting a discussion. They haven't, ruled it out. So even if you look at President Yoon's interview from last week, he does say that there may be a time when Seoul will have to expand its mode of support if Russia commits, atrocities or severe damages to civilians. So South Korea has made it very clear that they are going to take the very principled common sense step, as they said, if the situation does spiral to that level, to an unacceptable situation, to directly quote them. But again, this is a hypothetical situation, and they've made it clear that they have been communicating with Washington about aid to Ukraine. So whether there will be some kind of concrete agreement on going forward, or any kind of statement, we're going to have to wait and see.
Some diplomacy here. And Mark, turning to you, having met President Yoon, Netflix, the CEO has rolled out his plan to invest $2.5 billion in Korean TV series and shows. So what are the prospects for cooperation in the culture sector between the two countries?
Well, they're very important. I mean, we talk about semiconductors and batteries and autos, but the South Korean entertainment industry is huge and influential. It's a great example of soft power. Yeah. So Netflix investment is one of the headline issues from this summit. And it shows that the Korean entertainment industry has been developing for decades. Netflix is not gambling. They know that it's a proven track record for Korea. So increasing the amount of Korean entertainment available to American audiences will strengthen ties between the two countries.
All right, and Soo-young, before we let you go, on a rather lighter note, we heard this in our previous report, but do we know what the White House has on its menu for the state dinner? I heard unique cuisine will be served.
Well, they certainly do have something special cooking up for the two leaders and their spouses this evening at their state dinner. And, well, there's going to be some short ribs, I believe, which I believe is quite an authentic American dish. Am I right? Right, and it will obviously infuse some traditional Korean ingredients as well, like cabbages, which we like to put in our dishes, and use some various spices. Sorry, I'm not a chef. I'm not very eloquent in terms of these cuisine-related matters. But yes, there'll be ribs and also Maryland crab cakes, I believe. That's which just sounds succulent and very delicious. And apparently, President Biden's favorite is going to be the dessert, and that's going to be a banana split with some kind of lemon bar. Again, I'm not doing a very good job of making it sound very appealing. Sorry to the chef, of course, but it sounds absolutely delicious. I think it would be my favorite too. There's going to be some ginger snaps and apparently a bit of doenjang, Korean soybean paste, right? So I don't know how that combination is going to go. I mean, what do you think, Mr. Takola? Do you think it's...
I think the menu is fantastic. And for me, it's a metaphor for the entire visit, because it's not Korean dishes and American dishes side by side. It's fusion. So it shows when you blend American and Korean content, exciting things happen.
It's not just a cuisine, it has a meaning. All right, Vice President Takola and Soo-young, our presidential office correspondent, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Soo-young, so much anticipation here over the summit outcomes later in the day. For more of the day's headlines, back to the Arirang News Studio in Seoul with our Ji-young. Ji-young, take it away.
Thank you, Jung-min, for that. That was our Yoon Jung-min live from Washington, D.C. Now, back in South Korea, Speaker of the country's National Assembly Kim Jin-pyo and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo jointly held a reception in Parliament to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the ROK-U.S. alliance. Invited were not only Korean dignitaries, but also Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Seoul, Joy Sakurai, and Commander of the 8th U.S. Army, Willard Burson, who both wished President Yoon Suk-yeol success in his ongoing state visit to the U.S. Calling for their alliance to further develop, Speaker Kim brought up in his congratulatory remarks the need to form a new framework for parliamentary diplomacy by establishing bilateral unions of Korean and American lawmakers. Prime Minister Han, meanwhile, assessed the alliance to be one of the most successful in history and asked those present for more support so that it can continue to flourish into the future. In a separate development over in Washington, D.C., U.S. President Joe Biden has made public his plans to run for a re-election in 2024. His rallying call this time around appears to be, "Let's finish the job." Yoon-jin has more on his bid.
On Tuesday, U.S. President Joe Biden was greeted with chants of "Let's go Joe" from a crowd of building trades union members, a key base of Democratic support following his announcement to run for re-election in 2024. Biden highlighted that things are being turned around, that changes are being made, and that it is time to finish the job.
Now we've just got to keep it going. Finish the job. We just remember who we are. We are the United States of America. There's nothing nothing beyond our capacity. Nothing. If we work together.
This was during his first public appearance since confirming he's looking to stay in the White House in a 3-minute video where he promised to heal the soul of the nation. He also said the question the nation is facing is whether there's more or less freedom and more or fewer rights in the years ahead. President Biden described Republican platforms as a threat to American freedom, calling them MAGA extremists, referring to MAGA, or Make America Great Again, a slogan that has become synonymous with Donald Trump supporters. At age 80, President Biden is the oldest serving president and now needs to overcome Americans' concerns about his age in order to win re-election. But this is also the case for Donald Trump, aged 76, who Biden will face off against in the November 2024 election if he wins the Republican primary race. And challenging President Biden within the Democratic Party for the presidential nomination is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the son of former Senator Robert F. Kennedy and nephew of former President John F. Kennedy, seen as royalty in Democratic politics. Vice President Kamala Harris will once again be Biden's running mate. 이은진, 아리랑 뉴스.
Now, back here in South Korea, concerns remain over South Korea's shrinking population as February marks a fresh low in the number of new births. Moon Hae-ryun reports.
South Korea's birth rate was at its lowest for the month of February since data was first compiled in the early 1980s. According to a report released by Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the number of births tumbled to 19,939, which is a 3.7% decline compared to February last year. Meanwhile, the number of deaths reached some 27,000, a 6.5% decrease on year. This brought the natural change calculated by subtracting the number of deaths from the number of births to a decline of over 7,000. While that's a smaller decline than in January, when the natural population fell by 9,000, South Korea's population has been seeing a natural decline for nearly 4 years in a row. However, things may be looking up with the rising number of marriages following the end of COVID-19 restrictions, enabling people to hold a wedding and move in together. There were 17,846 registered marriages in February this year, which is nearly a 17% rise compared to the same month last year. Similarly, the number of divorces also rose on year, albeit showing a smaller rise than the number of marriages. There were 7,228 divorce applications filed in February, a 1.3% rise on year, but a 0.3% decrease on month. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Mornings will stay chilly until tomorrow, creating big contrast in daily temperatures. With readings temporarily plummeting overnight, frost and ice may be seen for some inland regions. Daytime conditions will be a whole lot different, though, with temperatures returning to the seasonal norms. Dusty conditions have eased off and clean air has returned. We'll have no concerns about fine dust tomorrow. Air quality will be standing in the normal to good category nationwide. As for the weather conditions in Washington, D.C., light showers are in the forecast. Big fluctuation in temperatures will be seen here as well, with lows of 8 degrees and maximum temperatures of 19. For South Korea, sunny spells will dominate nationwide. Seoul will start off at 7 degrees. Highs in Seoul will get up to 20 degrees, Gwangju 23, Gyeongju will be fairly warm at 24 degrees. Until Friday, wide temperature gaps of more than 10 degrees are expected. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That's all for this Wednesday night's newscast. Thank you for watching, but we'll be back with special coverage in Washington, D.C. soon. Have a good night.